So question number one is that your company has data centers in Los Angeles and New York. The company has a Microsoft Azure subscription. You are configuring the two data center as geo-clustered site for site resiliency. You need to recommend an Azure storage redundancy option. You have the following data storage requirements. Data must be stored on multiple nodes. Data must be stored on nodes in separate geographic locations. Data can be read from the secondary location as well as from the primary location. Which of the following Azure stored redundancy options should you recommend? The options are option A, geo-redundant storage, option B, read access geo-redundant storage, option C, zone redundant storage, and option D, locally redundant storage. And the correct option is the read access geo redundant storage. So what is this read access geo redundant storage? So the geo redundant storage with GRS or GZRS replicates your data to another physical location in the secondary region to protect against regional outages. However, that data is available to be read only if customer or the Microsoft initiates a failover from the primary to the secondary region. Question number two is that you are asked with deploying Azure virtual machines for your company. You need to make use of appropriate cloud deployment solution. And the solution is you recommend use of software as a service that is SaaS solution. Does the solution meet the goal? Yes or no. The options are yes or no, and the correct option is no. And why? It is because using infrastructure as a service, in our case, we can rent IT infrastructure such as servers and virtual machines, storage, networks, and operating system from a cloud provider on a pay-as-you-go basis. So the right choice here would have been as infrastructure as a service when you want to deploy virtual machine for your company on a cloud service provider infrastructure. Question number three is that you are tasked with deploying Azure virtual machines for your company. Again, we have the same scenario. You need to make use of the appropriate cloud deployment solution. Solution is you recommend use the platform as a service. Does this solution meet the goal? And the options are again yes and no. And the correct option is again no. As we studied in the earlier question, that the right option would have be IaaS or infrastructure as a service. So the platform as a service basically refers to cloud computing service that supply an on-demand environment for developing, testing, delivering, and managing software applications. PaaS is designed to make it easier for developers to quickly create web or mobile apps without worrying about setting up or managing the underlying infrastructure of servers, storage, network, and database needed for the deployment. But here we are talking about deploying our virtual machines. So again, PaaS is also not our recommended or desired solution. Question number four is that you are tasked with developing with deploying again Azure virtual machines for your company. You need to make use of the appropriate cloud deployment solution, and you recommend use of infrastructure as a service IaaS. Does this solution meet the goal? Yes, finally, this solution meets the goal. When you want to deploy your own virtual machines and you need the underlying infrastructure such as storage, network, etc., then you need the IaaS solution. Because again, using this, you can rent the IT infrastructure, servers, virtual machines, storage, network, and operating system from cloud provider on a pay-as-you-go basis. Question number five is that you are planning to migrate a company to Azure. Each of the company's numerous divisions will have an administrator in place to manage the Azure resources used by their respective division. You want to make sure that the Azure deployment you employ allows for Azure to be segmented for divisions while keeping administrative effort to minimum. Solution is you plan to make use of several Azure Active Directories, several Azure ADs. Does the solution meet the goal? Option are again yes and no, and the correct option is no. And why is that? It is because creating multiple Azure Active Directories for each division is not the most suitable solution for achieving segmentation of Azure resources for division. While it is technically possible to have separate Azure AD directories for different divisions, this approach can lead to increased administrative complexity and additional management overhead. So, this solution is not the perfect or preferable solution. Again, we have another question that your developers have created a portal web app for users in Miami branch office. The web application will be publicly accessible and used by Miami users to retrieve customer and product information. The web app is currently running an on-premise test environment. You plan to host the web app on Azure. You need to determine which Azure web tier plan to host the web app. The web tier plan must meet the following requirements, and the requirements are the website will use the URL that is miami.wayland.com. The website will be deployed to two instances. SSL support must be included. The website requires 12 GB of storage. Cost must be minimized. Which web tier should you use? And the options are option A standard, B basic, C free, and option D is shared. And the correct option is the standard web tier will be the recommended web tier plan. And why is that? Because in the question, the keywords are that the storage requirement is 12 GB. The free plan give us 1 GB. Shared again, it is equal to 1 GB. Basic plans give us 10 GB. While standard plan give us 50 GB. So this fulfills our requirement, and the premium and isolated again gives more than the what we need for. So the suitable option is the standard. Question number 7 is that your company is planning to migrate all their virtual machines to Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. The virtual machines are currently hosted on the Hyper-V host in a data center. You are required to make sure that the intended Azure solution uses the correct expenditure model. Solution is you should recommend the use of the elastic expenditure model. Does this solution meet the goal? And option are yes or no. And the correct option is no. And why is that? It is because the elastic expenditure model or elasticity is not basically an expenditure model. Rather, elasticity is one of the characteristic of the cloud computing. So the elasticity is basically a feature or characteristic of cloud computing, but it is not an expenditure model in Microsoft Azure. Question number 8 is again that your company is planning to migrate all their virtual machine to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. The virtual machines are currently hosted on the Hyper-V host in a data center. You are required to make sure that the intended Azure solution uses the correct expenditure model. Again, you should recommend the use of the scalable expenditure model. Again, does this solution meet the goal? And the options are yes or no. And the correct option is again no. Why? Because again, the term scalable expenditure model still is not a standard term in Azure or cloud computing. The common expenditure model in Azure are pay-as-you-go and reserved instances. Again, the question number 9 is recommendation. We have the same question. I will directly go to the solution. Here you should recommend the use of the operational expenditure model. Does the solution meet the goal? And here, this time, the correct option is yes. So finally, we have arrived to the correct option. So the operating expenditures are ongoing costs of doing business. Consuming cloud services in a pay-as-you-go model could qualify as an operating expenditure. Question number 10 is that you are required to deploy an artificial intelligence solution in Azure. You want to make sure that you are able to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics for the solution. And the solution is you should make use of the Azure Cosmos DB in order to get this artificial intelligence solution. The solution is Azure Cosmos DB. Does the solution meet the goal? Yes or no? And the correct option is no. Why? Because Machine Learning Studio is basically the right solution. It is a drag and drop tool you can use to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics solutions. Azure Cosmos DB is a fully managed NoSQL database for modern app development. Question number 11 is that your company's Active Directory forest includes thousands of user accounts. You have been informed that all network resources will be migrated to Azure. Thereafter, the on-premises data center will be retired. You are required to employ a strategy that reduces the effect on users. Remember the keywords. Once the planned migration has been completed, solution is you plan to sync all Active Directory user account to Azure Active Directory. Does the solution meet the goal? Yes or no? And the correct option is yes. And the explanation is by syncing the user accounts to Azure Active Directory using tools like Azure Active Directory Connect, users can continue using their existing credential to access cloud resources after the migration. This provides a seamless experience for users and reduces the disruption typically associated with migrations. Question number 12 is that you are required to deploy an artificial intelligence solution in Azure. You want to make sure that you are able to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics for the solution. And the solution is you should make use of Azure Machine Learning Studio. Does the solution meet the goal? The options are yes or no. The correct option is yes. The Azure Machine Learning Studio meets the requirement of your this artificial intelligence solution. Machine Learning Studio Classic is a drag and drop tool you can use to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics solution. Question number 13 is that your company's infrastructure includes a number of business units that each need a large number of various Azure resources for everyday operations. Hi everyone. So in the last video, we did the walkthrough from question number 1 to question number 14. So this is the second video and we will straightly start from question number 15. So let's get started. So the question is that your company's infrastructure includes a number of business units that each need a large number of various Azure resources for everyday operation. The resources required by each business unit are identical. You are required to sanction a strategy to create Azure resources automatically. Solution: you recommend that the Azure Resource Manager templates be included in the strategy. Does the solution meet the goal? Yes or no? And the correct option is yes. So the Azure Resource Manager is basically the solution of all this scenario. Question number 16 is that you are tasked with deploying a critical LOB application which will be installed on a virtual machine to Azure. You are informed that the application deployment strategy should allow for a guaranteed availability of 99.99%. You need to make sure that the strategy requires as little virtual machines and availability zones as possible. Solution: you include two virtual machines and one availability zone in your strategy? Does the solution meet the requirement? And the options are again yes or no, and the correct option is no. And why is that? It is because for all virtual machines that have two or more instances deployed across two or more availability zones in the same Azure region, we guarantee that you will have virtual machine connectivity to at least one instance at least 99.99% of the time. So this is straight from the Microsoft. So if you want the 99.99% availability, you must deploy your resources across two availability zone, not one availability zone. For all virtual machines that have two or more instances deployed in the same availability zone set or in the same dedicated host group, we guarantee you will have virtual machines connectivity to at least one instance at least 99.95%. So if you have, such as in this case, if your resources are available or deployed in one availability zone, then you have 99.95% availability. While if you have two availability zones, your resources are deployed in two availability zones, then you have the availability of 99.99%. Question number 17 is that your company's developers intend to deploy a large number of custom virtual machines on a weekly basis. They will also be removing these virtual machines during the same week as it was deployed. 60% of the virtual machines have Windows Server 2016 installed, while the other 40% has Ubuntu Linux installed. You are required to make sure that the administrative effort needed for this process is reduced by employing a suitable Azure service solution. You recommend the use of Microsoft Managed Desktop. Does the solution meet the goal? And the options are yes or no. And the correct option is no. Why is that? Because the Microsoft Managed Desktop is not an appropriate solution for deploying and managing a large number of custom virtual machines on a weekly basis. Microsoft Managed Desktop is basically a service that provides managed Windows 10 devices for organization, and it's not designed for managing virtual machines, especially with the frequency and diversity described in this scenario. Question number 18 is your company's developers intend to deploy a large number of custom virtual machines on a weekly basis. Again, we have the same question, and I will skip the question and straightly get to the solution. So the solution this time is that you recommend the use of Azure reserved virtual machine instances. Does the solution meet the goal? The options are again yes or no, and the correct option is no. Again, the Azure reserved virtual machine instance does not meet the goal. Why? Because the Azure reserved virtual machine instance is a virtual machine on the Microsoft Azure public cloud that has been reserved for dedicated use on a 1 or 3 year basis. This is not the required solution for our scenario where we require the deployment of many virtual machines that include Windows as well as Linux. Question number 19 is again, we have the same question, the same scenario. This time the solution is that you recommend the use of Azure DevTest Labs. Does the solution meet the goal? And this time the correct option is yes. So finally, we have found the solution, the Azure DevTest Labs. And what it is, the Azure DevTest Lab is designed to manage the life cycle of deployment and testing environments, providing automation for creating and deletion of resources, including virtual machines. It allows for rapid provisioning and deprovisioning of VMs, which aligns well with the requirement of deploying a large number of custom virtual machines on a weekly basis and removing them within the same week. Question number 20 is that your company has virtual machines hosted in Microsoft Azure. The VMs are located in a single Azure virtual network named VNet1. The company has users that work remotely. The remote workers require access to the VMs on VNet1. You need to provide access for the remote workers. What should you do? And the options are option A, configure a site to site VPN. Option B, configure a VNet to VNet VPN. Option C, configure a point to site VPN. Option D, configure direct access on Windows Server 2012 server VM. And option E, configure a multi-site VPN. And the correct option is that you need to configure a point to site, that is P2S VPN. What it is? So the point to site VPN, basically the point to site VPN gateway connection lets you create a secure connection to your virtual network from an individual client computer. So here we are, our requirement is of a individual clients, because we want the remote workers to be able to connect to the cloud. So these are, they have, the remote workers have individual clients. So the P2S point to site VPN is also useful solution to be used instead of site to site VPN when you have only few clients, such as in our case that need to be connected to the VNet. And this is just a visual of this scenario. So here, let's suppose this is our VNet one that we want to connect. It is inside the cloud. This is, let's suppose, our Azure cloud. And these are our, let's suppose, remote workers. These are their clients. So in order to connect securely from these clients to this VNet one, what we will do, we will use the P2S or point to site VPN. So the correct option is, in order for remote clients to connect to the VNet one, a remote worker, we should use the point to site VPN. Question number 21 is that you have been informed by your supervisors of the company's intentions to automate server deployment to Azure. There is, however, some concern that administrative credential could be uncovered during this process. You are required to make sure that during the deployment, the administrative credentials are encrypted using a suitable Azure solution. And solution, you recommend the use of Azure Information Protection. Does the solution meet the goal? Options are again yes or no. And the correct option is no. So the Azure Information Protection does not meet our requirement. Why is that? Because the Azure Information Protection is a cloud-based solution that enables organizations to discover, classify, and protect documents and emails by applying labels to them. It does not encrypt or protect the credential as is required in our case. So then what? Again, we have the same requirement, we have the same question, the same scenario. I won't read the question again and we'll get straight to the solution. This time the solution is that you recommend the use of Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA. Does this solution meet the goal? And the options are again, option A, yes, option B, no, and the correct option is no. The MFA or multi-factor authentication also does not encrypt or protect our credentials. So why is that? Because MFA is a solution that adds an additional layer of authentication to the login process, and it can help prevent unauthorized access to the resources. MFA is such that if you are using a username, let's suppose a user and a password to log into some website or some application. Let's suppose there is some application. Now, if you add an additional thing, let's suppose a PIN, an SMS token. Let's suppose you added an SMS token or a biometric, then this is multi-factor. You added an additional security layer that each time you log in, you receive a PIN on your mobile device, and then you enter the PIN to the application login, before after entering the password. So you have two protection. One is password and second is SMS. If password is compromised, you still have the SMS. The user or the hacker still cannot get access to the application because he won't receive the SMS. So that is MFA or multi-factor. In order to encrypt the administrative credential during server deployment to Azure, a better solution would be to use Azure Key Vault. Azure Key Vault is a cloud-based service that provides secure storage of keys, secrets, and certificates. By storing the administrative credential in Azure Key Vault, they can be encrypted and protected from unauthorized access. And question number 23 is that your company has an Azure Active Directory environment. Users occasionally connect to Azure AD via the internet. You have been tasked with making sure that users who connect to Azure AD via the internet from an unidentified IP address are automatically encouraged to change password. Solution: you configure the use of Azure Identity Protection. Does the solution meet the goal? And the options are option A, yes, option B, no. And the correct option is yes. So the Azure Identity Protection would enabling or configuring the Azure Identity Protection will require the user to or encourage him or her to change the password. And the Azure Identity Protection is a comprehensive solution that helps you protect your organization's identities and detect and respond to potential identity related risks. Question number 24 is again, we have the same scenario, we have the same question as the previous question, but this time the solution is you configure the use of Azure AD Privilege Identity Management. Does the solution meet the goal? The answer would have should be no, because we already found the answer in the previous question. So why is Azure AD Privilege Identity Management not the answer? It is because the Privileged Identity Management provides time-based and approval-based role activation to mitigate the risks of excessive, unnecessary, or misused access permissions on resources that you care about. Here are some of the key features of Privileged Identity Management. It provides just-in-time privileged access to Azure AD and Azure resources. Assign time-bound access to resources using start and end dates. Require approval to activate privileged roles, and enforce multi-factor authentication to activate any role. Question number 25. You are planning a strategy to deploy numerous web servers and database servers to Azure. This strategy should allow for connection types between the web server and database servers to be controlled. Solution: you include network security group NSGs in your strategy. Does the solution meet the goal? The options are option A, yes, option B, no, and the correct option is yes. So the inclusion of network security group would allow us the connection protection or connection control between the web server and database server. So what is NSG? NSG is basically you can use an Azure network security group to filter network traffic to and from Azure resources in an Azure virtual network. A network security group contains security rules that allow or deny inbound traffic to or outbound traffic from several type of resources. So it acts basically just like a firewall. Let's suppose this is a firewall. Here, let's suppose your resource one, or we can say here is your application and here is your database. And they are connected through this firewall. So this firewall, if this application wants to access this database, the firewall can block this connection or it can allow, depending upon the configuration or the rules that you have configured. So this is the function of NSG inside the cloud, inside the Microsoft Azure cloud. Question number 26 is that you are planning a strategy to deploy numerous web servers and database servers to Azure. This strategy should allow for connection types between the web server and database servers to be controlled. Again, we have the same question. Solution, you include a local gateway in your strategy. Does the solution meet the goal? And the options are yes or no, and the correct option is no, because we already studied in the previous question that the connection between servers can be controlled in the cloud through NSG, Network Security Group. So why is the local network gateway not our required solution? It is because the local network gateway is a specific object that represents your on-premise location, the site for routing purposes. It is basically your on-premise, your inside your local network. It is a device that is used for routing traffic, and it cannot be used inside the cloud for controlling traffic between servers. Question number 27 is that you have an on-premise network that contains several servers. You plan to migrate all the servers to Azure. You need to recommend a solution to ensure that some of the servers are available if a single Azure data center goes offline for an extended period. What should you include in the recommendation? The options are option A, fault tolerance, option B, elasticity, option C, scalability, and option D, low latency. And the correct option is the fault tolerance. As the name indicates, if you have a fault inside one of your server or in one of your resources, the fault should be tolerated and you should still be able, user should still be able to use the application or resources without any outage. So how is that? Let's suppose this is our Microsoft Azure, the cloud region. This is a physical location. And inside the region, there are multiple availability zones. Let's suppose we have availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and availability zone 3. So if you deploy your server, let's suppose we have a database. If you deploy a database here, and again, same copy of database in another availability zone, and inside, let's suppose inside the third. So if there is some issue, this is, let's suppose, our primary copy. If there is some issue at this availability zone inside the data center, then you can still access the resources, or user can still access the database from the another availability zone, because we have the same copy available here. So this is called fault tolerance. If we have fault at one location, the fault can be tolerated because we have the same copy available inside another location. Question number 28 is that what are two characteristics of the public cloud? Each correct answer represents a complete solution. And the options are A, dedicated hardware, B, unsecured connection, C, limited storage, D, metered pricing, and E, self-service management. And the correct options are the metered pricing. So the public cloud provide us with the metered pricing and self-service management. What are these two? So the cloud does provide metered pricing as you pay for the resources you use. It means that as we pay as you go, or pay as you use. We can also say that when you use, you are metered. For the amount of resources you use, you are metered. If your usage is low, you will be charged low, and if your usage is high, you will be charged accordingly. Similarly, the cloud also provides a self-managed service, as you can use the portal, the cloud portal, to add, change, and remove the resources you need when you need them. So this is a self-serving portal that you can do, administer it yourself. You can add resources, you can remove resources, and all that stuff. So these are the two advantages or two characteristics of the cloud. Question number 29 is that your company hosts an accounting application named App1 that is used by all the customers of the company. App1 has low usage during the first 3 weeks of the each month and very high usage during the last week of the each month. Which benefits of Azure Cloud Services supports cost management for this type of usage pattern? And the options are option A, high availability, option B, high latency, option C, elasticity, and option D, load balancing. And the correct option is elasticity. So what is elasticity? Azure Cloud Services can automatically adjust the resources allocated to the application based on demand, allowing for cost savings during periods of low usage and ensuring that the application can handle spikes spikes in usage during the last week of each month. So this is called elasticity. The cloud resources are elastic. When the requirement is high, the resources also increase. The capacity of resources also increase. And when the demand is low, the resources are reduced, so you are charged low and you save cost. Question number 30 is that you plan to migrate a web application to Azure. The web application is accessed by external users. You need to recommend a cloud deployment solution to minimize the amount of administrative effort used to manage the web application. What should you include in the recommendation? And the options are A, software as a service, SaaS, B, platform as a service, PaaS, C, infrastructure as a service, IaaS, and D, database as a service, DOS. And the correct option is the platform as a service or PaaS. So the keywords here are that we want to reduce or minimize the administrative effort to manage the web application. So in the past, we don't need to install the operating system or configure the networks as in the case in IaaS. We have ready-made operating system installed, everything. We just need to deploy our application. So our administrative overhead is very low. In SaaS, we have already available applications such as Microsoft 360. We don't install our own application. So in this case, this is not our recommended solution. Well, the PaaS is our recommended solution because we have low administrator overhead and we can also deploy our own web application. So that's all for today. Please like and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you and bye. Hi everyone and welcome to the part 3 of Microsoft Azure Fundamentals series. So let's get started with the questions. So the question number 31 is that you need to recommend a solution that provides additional resources to your users. The solution must minimize capital and operational expenditure costs. What should you include in the recommendation? And the options are a complete migration to the cloud. Option B, an additional data center. Option C, a private cloud. And option D, a hybrid cloud. And the correct answer is a hybrid cloud. So we already have a solution. It means we have an on-prem solution and we need additional resources. So for additional resources, we can move to the cloud, but some of our resources will still be in on-premise. So we will require a hybrid solution in which we have some resources on-prem, while some resources, the additional resources are in the cloud. So in this way, we can reduce the capital expenditure by not buying additional hardware. So here is the explanation. A hybrid cloud is a combination of a private cloud and a public cloud. Capital expenditure is the spending of money upfront for infrastructure such as new servers. With a hybrid cloud, you can continue to use the on-premise servers while adding new servers in the cloud. Adding new servers in the Azure minimizes the capital expenditure cost, as you are not paying for new servers as you would if you deployed new servers on premises. Question number 32 is that you plan to migrate several servers from an on-premises network to Azure. What is an advantage of using a public cloud service for servers over an on-premises network? And the options are option A public cloud is owned by public, not a private corporation. Option B, the public cloud is a crowdsourcing solution that provides corporations with ability to enhance the cloud. Option C, all public cloud resources can be freely accessed by every member of the public. And option D, the public cloud is a shared entity whereby multiple corporates each use a portion of the resources in the cloud. So the correct answer is this is basically the definition of a public cloud or the definition of a cloud. The public cloud is a shared entity whereby multiple corporations each use a portion of the resources inside the cloud. Question number 33 is that in which type of cloud model are all hardware resources owned by a third party and shared between multiple tenants? And the options are A, private, option B, hybrid, option C, community, and option D, public. And the correct option is the public cloud. And here is the explanation of each type of the cloud model. So the private cloud is basically owned and taken care by an internal organization to which it belongs. Public cloud is entirely taken care by cloud providers such as Azure, which is provided by Microsoft, AWS, which is provided by Amazon, and GCP, which is provided by Google. Hybrid cloud is a combination of on-premises, private, as well as the public or third-party cloud. Another term is the community cloud, in which a collaborative effort in which an infrastructure is shared between several organizations from a specific community with common concerns, whether managed internally or by third party and hosted internally or externally. So the difference between community and the public is that the public is public accessed by everyone, every organization that may not share same concern, while the community cloud is a specific type of a public cloud which is owned by a specific set of organization that use similar set of resources or they share similar concerns, such as we may say that the community cloud that is used by all the government agencies inside a country. We can call such cloud as a community cloud because they all need same security and similar type of resources. Question number 34 is that you have 1000 virtual machines hosted on the Hyper-V hosts in a data center. You plan to migrate all the virtual machines to an Azure pay-as-you-go subscription. You need to identify which expenditure model to use for the plain Azure solution. Which expenditure model would you identify? The options are A, operational, B, elastic, C, capital, and D, scalable. And the correct option is the operational model, because we know in the question it says that you want a solution that you pay as you go subscription. So as you use the resources depending upon your requirement, you pay according to your usage. Such type of expenditure or model is known as operational model. It is also known as OPEX, in which you only pay the operational expenditure. There is no capex involved. Capex means the capital expenditure which you pay the upfront, such as for buying hardware or for constructing your own data center. That all involves upfront expenditure known as capex or capital expenditure. This is the definition. This is explanation of this question. Let me clear it. So it states that one of the major changes that you will face when you move from on-premises cloud to the public cloud is the switch from capital expenditure, that is buying hardware, to operational expenditure, paying for service as you use it. This switch also requires more careful management of your costs The benefit of the cloud is that you can fundamentally and positively affect the cost of a service you use by merely shutting down or resizing it when it's not needed. Question number 35 is that your company has an on-premise network that contains multiple servers. The company plans to reduce the following administrative responsibilities that are backing up application data, replicating failed server hardware, managing physical server security, updating server operating systems, managing permissions to share documents. The company plans to migrate servers to Azure's virtual machines. You need to identify which administrative responsibility will be eliminated after the planned migration. Which two responsibilities should you identify? Each correct answer represents a complete solution. And the options are A. Replacing failed hardware. Option B. Backing up application data. C. Managing physical hardware security. D. Updating server operating systems. And E. Managing permission to share documents. And the correct options are replacing failed server hardware. So when you move to the cloud, you no longer need to either buy or replace physical hardware. This is all taken care of by the cloud provider. And you also don't need to worry about managing the physical security of the servers or of the data center. These all are taken care of by the cloud provider while backing up application data, updating your operating system, and managing permissions to your data and documents is still your responsibility even when you are inside the cloud. Question number 36 is that you plan to provision infrastructure as a service resources in Azure. Which resource is an example of IaaS or infrastructure as a service? And the options are A, an Azure web app, B, an Azure virtual machine, C, an Azure Logic App, and D, an Azure SQL database. And the correct option is an Azure virtual machine. So the Azure virtual machine is the example of a structure as a service. The web app, logical app, and the SQL database, these all are example of platform as a service or PaaS. An Azure virtual machine is an example of infrastructure as a service, while Azure web app, Azure Logic App, and Azure SQL Database are all examples of platform as a service or PaaS. Question number 37 is to which cloud model can you deploy physical servers? So remember, inside the cloud, you never deploy physical server. This is taken care of by the cloud provider. So where you need to deploy the physical servers? So the options are private cloud and hybrid cloud only. Option B, private cloud only. Option C, private cloud, hybrid cloud, and public cloud. And option D, hybrid cloud only. And the correct option is private cloud and the hybrid cloud. So inside private cloud, it is your own. It is managed by the organization herself. So the deployment of the servers is the responsibility of the organization, the internal organization, not the cloud provider. Similarly, in the hybrid cloud, this is the hybrid cloud is a combination of private plus public cloud. So again, the installation of server inside the private cloud is again the responsibility of the organization. So these both the private cloud as well as the hybrid cloud, there you may need to deploy the physical servers. There is the explanation. A private cloud is an on-premises, so you can deploy physical server. A hybrid cloud is a mix of on-premise and public cloud resources. You can deploy physical servers on-premises. Question number 38 is that you have 50 virtual machines hosted on premises and 50 virtual machines hosted in Azure. The on-premises virtual machine and the Azure virtual machines connect to each other. Which type of cloud model is this? So again, this is straightforward. Options are option A, hybrid, B, private, and C, public. And the correct option is Hybrid because we have the combination of the on-premises, that is the private cloud, we may say, and the Azure or the public cloud. So this type of cloud, which is the combination of on-premise or private plus public, then this referred to as the hybrid. Question number 39 is that your company plans to deploy several custom applications to Azure. The application will provide invoicing services to customers of the company. Each application will have several prerequisite applications and services installed. You need to recommend a cloud deployment solution for all the application. What should you recommend? And again, the options are option A, software as a service, option B, platform as a service, and option C, infrastructure as a service. The correct option is infrastructure as a service. And why is that? Because infrastructure as a service is an instant computing infrastructure provisions and managed over the internet. The IaaS, or infrastructure as a service provider, manages the infrastructure while you purchase, install, configure, and manage your own software. So here, since you need to deploy your custom applications, you will needing the operating system according to your custom application, virtual machine. So these all comes on inside or under the umbrella of infrastructure as a service. Question number 40 is that your company plans to migrate all its data and resources to Azure. The company's migration plan states that only platform as a service solutions must be used in Azure. You need to deploy an Azure environment that meets the company's migration plan. What should you create? The options are A, Azure virtual machines, Azure SQL databases, and Azure storage accounts. Option B, an Azure app service and Azure virtual machines that have Microsoft SQL Server installed. Option C, an Azure app service and Azure SQL databases. And option D, Azure storage accounts and web server in Azure virtual machines. So since we are talking about PaaS or platform as a service, the Azure app service and Azure SQL database, they belongs to the platform as a service. So this is the correct option. Azure App Service and Azure SQL databases are example of Azure PaaS solution. Therefore, this solution does meet the goal. Question number 41 is that what does a customer provide in a software as a service model? The options are option A, application data, option B, data storage, option C, compute resources, and option D, application software. And the correct option is the application data. Here is the explanation. So software as a service allows users to connect and use cloud-based applications over the internet. Common examples are email, calendaring software, and office tools such as Microsoft Office 365. So these all applications are already installed and available inside the cloud. You don't need to install or develop or manage any of these applications. The SaaS provides a complete software solution that you purchase on a pay-as-you-go basis from a cloud provider. You only need to use these application and provide your data or the application data, such as we can say that the Office in Office 360, the email service used inside the or the Office used inside the Office application used in the Office 365 is the example of SaaS where only you provide your data that you use. Question number 42 is that what is the first stage in the Microsoft Cloud adoption framework for Azure? The options are option A, adopt the cloud, option B, make a plan, option C, ready your organization, and option D, define your strategy. And the correct option is define your strategy. So this is the diagrammatical representation of the Microsoft Cloud adoption framework for Azure. So the first step is defining the strategy, then planning, then getting ready, and then adopting the cloud. And after that, you go on and manage the cloud. Question number 35 is that you have an accounting application named App1 that uses a legacy database. You plan to move App1 to the cloud. Which service model should you use? And the options are A, platform as a service, B, infrastructure as a service, and C, software as a service. And the correct option is infrastructure as a service. It is because the keyword here is the legacy. It implies that a legacy database is being used which Microsoft may not offer anymore as a PaaS service. So it must be PaaS. So it must be IaaS or infrastructure as a service because it is legacy and you need it while it may no longer be provided by the cloud provider. Question number 44 is which cloud computing model includes on-premises and cloud-based resources? And the options are option A, hybrid, option B, public, and option C, private. And the correct option is the hybrid. Question number 45 is which term represents the ability to increase the computing capacity of a virtual machine by adding memory or CPUs? The options are option A, agility, option B, vertical scaling, option C, horizontal scaling, and option D, elasticity. And the correct option is the vertical scaling. So adding memory or CPU means vertical scalings. Vertical scaling, also known as scale up and scale down, means increasing or decreasing virtual machine sizes in response to a workload. Compare this behavior with horizontal scaling, also refers to a scale out and scale in, where the number of VMs is altered depending upon the workload. Hi everyone, and welcome to the part 4 of the Azure Fundamentals series. So let's get started with the question. So the first question in today's video is that which cloud computing benefit provides continuous user access to cloud-based application with minimal downtime? The options are option A, agility, option B, scalability, option C, elasticity, and option D, high availability. And the correct option is high availability. So the downtime is directly opposite to the availability. So the high availability gives us minimal downtime, and this is the explanation and definition of high availability. So high availability is a quality of computing infrastructure that is important for mission critical systems. High availability permits the computing infrastructure to continue functioning even when certain component fails. So here is explanation in the form of a diagram. So if we have some users that are accessing certain type of application through the internet. So currently, let's suppose these are the server that are hosting the application. So if any server of this cluster fails, then we have replicated servers. These servers can take place of this server. And again, if this server fails, we have another server. So this concept is known as high availability, that you have redundant resources, and in case of any component or any servers in your cluster fails, then there is no impact on the user performance because there are, you have already redundant resources that can replace the failed components. So that is the concept of high availability, that the user just does not incur or does not experience any type of downtime, and that is the main feature and benefit of the cloud computing. Question number 47 is that what are the two benefits of cloud computing? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. The options are option A, enable the rapid provisioning of resources. Option B, has increased administrative complexity. Option C, has the same configuration options as on-premises. And option D, shifts capital expenditure CapEx to operating expenditure OpEx. And the correct options are that the cloud enables us of rapid provisioning the resources. Why is that? Because we don't need to install cable and provision the cooling infrastructure, all these things. These are all taken care of by the cloud provider, and we can spin off and provision resources very rapidly just in the matter of seconds and minutes using the using just few clicks. And again, we don't need to invest any capital expenditure for buying hardware such as servers, etc. We just incur the operational expenditure. We are charged for the expenditure of the resources or the VMs that we use. So in the cloud, we just experience the capital operational expenditure in the form of resource usage. And this model is known as pay as you use or pay as you go. Question number 48 is that what is a feature of an Azure virtual network? And the options are option A, resource cost analysis, option B, packet inspection, option C, geo redundancy, and option D, isolation and segmentation. And the correct option is the virtual network. Azure Virtual Network provides us with isolation and segmentation. So what is Azure Virtual Network? It is the fundamental building block of your private network in Azure. VNet enables many types of Azure resources such as Azure virtual machines to securely communicate with each other, the internet, and on-premises network. VNetwork or VNet is similar to a traditional network that you would operate in your own data center, but brings with it additional benefits of Azure's infrastructure, such as scale, availability, and isolation. Question number 49 is that you need to identify the type of failure for which an Azure availability zone can be used to protect access to Azure services. What should you identify? And the options are option A, physical server failure, option B, an Azure region failure, option C, a storage failure, and option D, an Azure data center failure. And the correct option is the Azure data center failure. So this is an overview of the availability zone as well as region inside Azure. So on the very large scale, you have regions. This is Azure region, and inside Azure region, you have multiple availability zone. Here we have availability zone 1, 2, and 3. And then inside each availability zone, we have multiple data centers, one or more data centers. So here, for example, we have 1, 2, and 3 data center in each availability zone. So if, God forbid, one data center fails and your resources or your application is replicated across multiple data centers, then the user won't experience any downtime. Your application will still be available from the other data centers. So that is the concept of availability and high availability in Azure. Question number 50 is that you plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on the virtual machines are available if a single data center fails. Solution: you deploy the virtual machines to 2 or more resource groups. Does this meet the goal? And the options are yes or no. And the correct option is no. And why is that? It is because a resource group is a container that holds related resources for an Azure solution. The resource group can include all the resources for the solution or only those resources that you want to manage as a group. So the resource group is just a management concept. It is a container, and it does not cater for high availability. It is not a high availability solution. So the answer is no. Question number 51 is that you plan to deploy again several virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on the virtual machines are available if a single data center fails. Solution: you deploy the virtual machines to a scale set. Does this meet the goal? Again, the options are yes or no. And the correct option is again no. It is because this answer does not specify that the scale set will be configured across multiple data center. So this solution does not meet the goal. So if one data center fails, it means that your resources or application must be deployed across multiple data centers. But here, the solution does not represent or does not provide the replication of resources across multiple data centers. So this is again not the correct solution. Question number 52 is that your company plans to migrate to Azure. The company has several departments. All Azure resources used by each department will be managed by a department administrator. What are two possible techniques to segment Azure for the departments? And the options are A, multiple subscriptions, B, multiple Azure Active Directories, C, multiple regions, and D, multiple resource groups. And the correct option is multiple subscriptions as well as the multiple resource groups. So as we studied in the previous question, in resource group, you can group up similar or resources that belongs to the same department. So you can make different resource group and each resource group for each department. Similarly, you can have multiple subscriptions, different subscription for each department. Subscription means that the accounting and the billing subscription. So if you can subscribe and you can gain subscription separately for each department, that will also give you a separate administrative overview as well as the resource groups. Question number 53 is that you attempt to create several managed Microsoft SQL Server instances in an Azure environment and receive a message that you must increase your Azure subscription limits. What would you do to increase the limits? And the options are A, create a service health alert, B, upgrade your support plan, C, modify an Azure policy, and D, create a new support request. And the correct option is that to increase your resource limit, you need to create a new support request. It is because many Azure resources have quota limits or quote limits. The purpose of the quota limits is to help you control your Azure cost. However, it is common to require an increase to the default quota. You can request a quota limit increase by opening a support request. Question number 54 is that your company plans to move several servers to Azure. The company's compliance policy states that a server named Fin server must be on a separate network segment. You are evaluating which Azure service can be used to meet the compliance policy requirements. So, which Azure solution should you recommend? Options are option A, a resource group for Fin server and another resource group for all the other servers. Option B, a virtual network for Fin server and another virtual network for all other servers. C, a VPN for Fin server and a virtual network gateway for each other server. And D, one resource group for all the servers and resource log for Fin server. And the correct option is that you need to have a virtual network for Fin server and another virtual network for the other server. So the virtual network is basically the network segmentation concept. It will keep the Fin server and other servers separate. The question states that Fin server must be on a separate network segment. The only way to separate Fin server from other servers is in networking term is to place the server in a different virtual network to the other servers. Question number 55 is that you plan to map a network drive from server computers that run Windows 10 to Azure storage. You need to create a storage solution in Azure for the planned mapped drive. What should you create? And the options are option A, an SQL, an Azure SQL database. Option B, a virtual machine data disk. Option C, a file service in a storage account. And option D, a blob service in a storage account. And the correct option is a file service in a storage account. So to create a storage solution in Azure for mapping a network drive from computers running Windows 10, you will need to create an Azure file share. An Azure File Share is a managed file storage service that enables you to create a shared network drive in Azure and access it from any device that supports the SMB server message block protocol, including the computers running Windows 10. Question number 56 is that your company plans to start using Azure and will migrate all its network resources to Azure. You need to start the planning process by exploring Azure. What should you create first? And the options are A subscription, B, a resource group, C, a virtual network, and D, a management network. And the correct option is A, subscription. So the first thing you create in Azure is a subscription. You can think of a Azure subscription as an Azure account. You get billed per subscription or per account. A subscription is an agreement with Microsoft to use one or more Microsoft cloud platform or services for which charges accrue based on either a per user license fee or on cloud-based resource consumption. Question number 57 is that which Azure service should you use to collect events from multiple resources into a centralized repository? The options are option A, Azure Events Hub, option B, Azure Analysis Services, option C, Azure Monitor, and option D, Azure Stream Analytics. And the correct option is the Azure Event Hub. And the Azure Event Hub is a big data streaming platform and event ingestion service. It can receive and process millions of events per second. Data sent to an event hub can be transformed and stored by using any real-time analytics provider or batching/storage adapters. Question number 58 is that you need to be notified when Microsoft plans to perform maintenance that can affect the resources deployed to an Azure subscription. What should you use? And the options are option A, Azure Monitor, option B, Azure Service Health, option C, Azure Advisor, and option D, Microsoft Trusted Center. The correct option is the Azure Service Health. So the Azure Service Health provides a personalized view of the health of the Azure services and regions you are using. This is the best place to look for service impacting communications about outages, planned maintenance activities, and other health advisories because the authenticated service health experience knows which services and resources you currently use. Question number 59 is that you plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on the virtual machine remain available if a single data center fails. What are two possible solutions? Each correct answer represents a complete solution, and the options are A, deploy virtual machines to two or more availability zones. Option B, deploy the virtual machines to two or more resource groups. Option C, deploy the virtual machines to a scale set. And option D, deploy the virtual machines to two or more regions. And the correct options are to deploy the virtual machines to two or more availability zones and deploy the virtual machines to two or more regions. So again, this is a concept of regions and availability zone. If you deploy resources to two or more availability zones, then if there is some issue in one availability zone, your resources or application will still be available from second availability zone. Similarly, this is one region. There are also multiple regions. This is, let's suppose, Azure region 1. There may be Azure region 2. And it will also have similarly availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and so on. So if your resources in one availability zone fails and they are deployed across secondary availability zone, your users will still be able to access the resources from the second Azure region. Question number 60 is that what is the most severe failure from which an Azure availability zone can be used to protect against To protect access to Azure services, the options are A, physical server failure, B, an Azure region failure, C, a storage failure, and D, an Azure data center failure. So the correct answer is the data center failure. So we have multiple availability zones. Let's suppose this availability zone, and then we have multiple data center inside each availability zone. Let me draw this is, let's suppose, availability zone 2. Here again we have one or more data center, typically 3. So if one data centers fail, the availability zone can help us from the secondary data center. And even if our resources are replicated across multiple availability zones, if the complete availability zones, we can access resources from the secondary availability zone. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and stay tuned for the next video. Hi and welcome to another video on Azure Fundamentals. So let's get started with the questions. So the question is that you need to purchase a third-party virtual security appliance that you will deploy to an Azure subscription. What should you use? And the options are A, Azure subscriptions, B, Azure Security Center, C, Azure Marketplace, and D, Microsoft Store. And the correct option is the Azure Marketplace. The Azure Marketplace is a digital marketplace that offers a wide range of third-party virtual appliances, including security appliances that can be deployed to an Azure subscription. And this is just an overview of this Azure Marketplace. I have taken this snapshot directly from the web. And here you can see that we can get the virtual appliances of all these categories, including the security that we are talking about, such as the NG Firewall by Palo Alto, NetGate, pfSense Plus Firewall, and etc. Besides the security, there are also these other categories such as DevOps, compute, blockchain, AI, and etc. So if you want to use any service or any application or virtual appliance that is provided by a third party and integrated inside Microsoft Azure, then the go-to place is the Microsoft Azure Marketplace. Question number 62 is that you plan to deploy a service to Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the service will be available if a data center fails. What should you use as part of the virtual machine deployment? The options are option A, availability sets, option B, proximity placement groups, option C, host groups, and option D, availability zones. And the correct option is the availability zone. So again, I have already used this diagram. So the availability zones are basically multiple geographical regions inside the Azure region, and each availability zone then contains one or multiple data centers. So let's suppose if you deploy the virtual machine or the specific service across multiple availability zones inside data center. So if one data center fails, the service can be made available from the second availability zone and the secondary data center. So that is the feature of the Azure high availability, that at the very high level we have the regions. Inside the region we have multiple availability zones. Inside each availability zone then we have multiple data centers, and again inside the data center we have the redundancy at the server level and the hardware level. So that is all about the high availability. Question number 63 is that your company has a Azure subscription that contains resources in several regions. Here we are talking about regions. You need to ensure that administrators can only create resources in those regions. What should you use? And the options are A, read-only lock, option B, an Azure policy, option C, a management group, and option D, a reservation. And the correct option is the Azure policy. So to ensure that administrator can only create resources in specific regions, you should use Azure policy. Azure policy is a service in Azure that you use to create, assign, and manage policies. These policies enforce different rules and effects over your resources, so those resources stay compliant with your corporate standards and several service level agreements. You can use Azure policy to enforce policies that limit the regions available for resource creation. Question number 64 is that what is the function of site-to-site VPN? So the keyword is site-to-site. We have also the P2S or the point-to-site VPN. But here we are talking about site-to-site VPN. And the options are: A, provides a secure connection between a computer on a public network and the corporate network. B, provide a dedicated private connection to Azure that does not travel over the internet. And C, provides a connection from an on-premises VPN device to Azure VPN gateway. And the correct option is the option C, that the site-to-site VPN used to provide a connection from an on-premises VPN device to an Azure VPN gateway. So always remember that the site-to-site VPN is between two VPN gateways or between two VPN devices. While the point-to-site VPN, it is basically between a individual client or between an individual computer to a VPN gateway. So that is the difference. And this one is also wrong because the VPN is used for travel over the internet to secure your connection over the public media such as the internet. And this is the explanation that the site-to-site VPN gateway connection is used to connect your on-premises network to an Azure virtual network over an IPsec, iKey, Internet Key Exchange, and it has two versions, Key Exchange version 1 and version 2 VPN tunnel. This type of connection requires a VPN device located on premises that has an externally facing public IP address assigned to it. And this is a diagrammatic view of this connection. So here we have our on-premises network, and here you must have a VPN device, let's suppose a firewall, that will use this public IP to make VPN, site-to-site VPN with your VPN gateway inside Azure. And this is known as the VPN tunnel over the internet. And the tunnel means that all your traffic is encrypted and traveling inside a virtual tunnel. Question number 65 is that you need to manage containers. Which two services can you use? Each correct answer represents a complete solution. And the options are: A, Azure Virtual Desktop; B, Azure Virtual Machines; C, Azure Functions; D, Azure Containers Instances; and E, Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. And the correct option is the Azure Container Services and the Azure Kubernetes Service, that is AKS. And this is the explanation or definition of these two services. You can pause the video and read the explanation if you want to. Question number 66 is that you plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on virtual machines are available if a single data center fails. Again, we have a question about high availability. Solution: you deploy the virtual machines across two or more availability zones. Does this meet the goal? And the options are yes or no. And of course, the answer is yes, as we already talked about in the previous question, that when you deploy your virtual machine, let's suppose this is my virtual machine VM1 across two availability zone, then if one availability zone is some issue with one data center inside one availability zone, your services can still be available from the secondary availability zone because you have deployed your VM or service in two availability zones. So that is the feature of high availability. Question number 67 is that one of the benefits of Azure SQL data warehouse is that high availability is built into the platform. Instructions about the question are that review the underlined text. If it makes the statement correct, select no changes is needed. If the statement is incorrect, select the answer choice that make the statement correct. So if this statement is correct, we will choose the no change is needed, and if this is not correct, then we will choose another option. So options are A, no change is needed. It means that the statement is correct, that SQL data warehouse is having built-in high availability. Option B, automatic scaling. C, data compression, and D, versioning. And the correct option is yes, that the benefit of Azure SQL Data Warehouse is that high availability is built in into the platform and you don't need any change. Next question is that you plan to deploy several Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that the services running on the virtual machines are available if a single data center fails. Again, we have the availability question. Solution, you deploy the virtual machines to 2 or more regions. Now we are talking about region. Does this meet the goal? And the options are yes. So again, the high availability at the very high level, we have the regions. Let's suppose this is region 1 and here we have region 2. And inside regions we have availability zones. Let's have availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and availability zone 3. In the same manner, we have availability zone 1, 2, and 3. So of course, if you deploy your services across multiple regions, and if there is some issue with the one region, then your services can be made available from the second region. So region is very large geographical area. The services in one region can be affected due to a very huge disruptions such as the tornadoes or earthquake in a very large area. And if you have the services in a second region, then this disruption can be mitigated through availability of services from the secondary region. Question number 69 is that at which OSI layer does ExpressRoute operate? And the options are A, layer 2, B, layer 3, C, layer 5, and D, layer 7. And the correct option is the layer 3. So there was some confusion about this question on many online forums. The right answer was selected as the layer 2, but this is direct from the Microsoft, and here we can see that it specifically say that Express routes operates at in layer 3. So the layer 3 is the correct option. Question number 70 is that you plan to store 20 terabyte of data in Azure. The data will be accessed infrequently and visualized by using Microsoft Power BI. You need to recommend a storage solution for the data. Which two solutions should you recommend? Each answer presents a complete solution. The options are A, Azure Data Lake, B, Azure Cosmos DB, C, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, D, Azure SQL Database, and E, Azure Database for PostgreSQL. And the correct options are the Azure Data Lake and the Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So again, this is the explanation of the answers. You can pause the video and read it if you like. Question number 71 is that an Azure administrator plans to run a PowerShell script that creates Azure resources. You need to recommend which computer configuration to use to run the script. Solution: run the script from a computer that runs Linux and has the Azure CLI tools installed. Does this meet the goal? The options are A, yes, B, no, and the correct option is no. Why? It is because a PowerShell script is a file that contains PowerShell commandlet and code. A PowerShell script needs to be run in PowerShell. PowerShell can now be installed on Linux. However, the question states that the computer has Azure CLI tools, not the PowerShell installed. Therefore, this solution does not meet the goal. So for the PowerShell script, you need the PowerShell shell. And here we are talking about Azure CLI. This is why this answer is not correct, and this Power CLI will not meet our goal. Again, an Azure administrator plans to run a PowerShell script that creates Azure resources. You need to recommend which computer configuration to use to run the script. This time the solution is to run the script from a computer that runs Chrome OS and uses Azure Cloud Shell. Does this meet the goal? And this time the answer is yes, because for the command script or the PowerShell script, the Azure Cloud Shell does meet the requirement. It is because a PowerShell script is a file that contains PowerShell commandlets or CMDlets and code. A PowerShell script needs to be run in PowerShell. With the Azure Cloud Shell, you can run PowerShell commandlets and scripts in a web browser. You log into the Azure portal and select the Azure Cloud Shell option. This will open a PowerShell session in the web browser. The Azure Cloud Shell has the necessary Azure PowerShell module installed. So the Azure Cloud Shell has the built-in PowerShell, and it will meet our goal of running the PowerShell scripts. Again, we have the same question that an Azure administrator plans to run the PowerShell script that creates Azure resource. You need to recommend which computer configuration to use to run the scripts. This time the solution is to run the script from a computer that runs macOS and has PowerShell Core 6.0 installed. Does it meet the goal? And the options are yes or no, and the correct option is yes, because the PowerShell Core will enable us to run the PowerShell scripts. So the computer has since PowerShell Core 6.0 installed, therefore this solution does meet the goal. Question number 74 is again we have the same question. This time the solution, let me read the question first. You have an Azure environment. You need to create a new Azure virtual machine from a tablet that runs the Android operating system. Solution, you use Bash in Azure Cloud Shell. Does this meet the goal? Options are yes or no. And the correct option is yes. It is because with Azure Cloud Shell, you can create virtual machine using Bash or PowerShell. Azure Cloud Shell is an interactive, authenticated, browser-accessible shell for managing Azure resources. It provides the flexibility of choosing the shell experience that best suits the way you work, either Bash or PowerShell. And the question 2075 and the last question is that you have an on-premises application that sends email notification automatically based on a role. You plan to migrate the application to Azure. You need to recommend a serverless computing solution for the application. What should you include in the recommendation? And the options are A, web app, B, a server image in Azure Marketplace, C, a logic app, and D, an API app. And the correct answer is the Logic app. Azure Logic app is a cloud service that helps you schedule, automate, and orchestrate tasks, business processes, and workflows when you need to integrate apps, data, system, and services across enterprises or organizations. So that's all for today. Please like and subscribe and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you and bye. Hello everyone and welcome to another session on Microsoft Azure Fundamental. So let's get started with the question. So the question is that you plan to deploy a website to Azure. The website will be accessed by users worldwide and will host large video files. You need to recommend which Azure feature must be used to provide the best video playback experience. What should you recommend? And the options are option A, an application gateway, option B, an Azure ExpressRoute circuit, option C, a content delivery network, that is CDN, and option D, an Azure traffic manager profile. And the correct option is the content delivery network. So what is a content delivery network? So this diagram basically depicts a content delivery network. So here, let's suppose this is the origin server. Let's suppose our video file is stored here. And these nodes are basically the part of the content distributed network. So when, let's suppose, a user one accesses this video file, it copy is cached here, or it is also stored here. So each time a new user or same user again accesses the file, then it is made available from this edge server, and so there is little delay and little performance impact and a very good or best playback experience to the user. So that is the concept of content delivery network, to deliver the content, especially the video, to the nearest location to the user for best playback experience. Question number 77 is that you have an Azure web app. You need to manage the settings of the web app from an iPhone. What are two Azure management tools that you can use? Each correct answer presents a complete solution, and the options are A. Azure CLI, B. The Azure portal, C. Azure Cloud Shell, D. Windows PowerShell, and E. Azure Storage Explorer. And the correct options are the Azure portal and the Azure Cloud Shell. So what are these? So the Azure portal is the web-based portal for managing Azure. Being web-based, you can use the Azure portal on iPhone. Azure Cloud Shell is a web-based command line for managing Azure. You access the Azure Cloud Shell from the Azure portal. Being web-based, you can use the Azure Cloud Shell on an iPhone. Question number 78 is that your company plans to deploy several million sensors that will upload data to Azure. You need to identify which Azure resources must be created to support the planned solution. Which two Azure resources should you identify? Each correct answer present part of the solution. And the options are option A, Azure Data Lake, option B, Azure Queue Storage, option C, Azure File Storage, option D, Azure IoT Hub, Internet of Things Hub, and option E, Azure Notification Hubs. And the correct options are the Azure Data Lake and the Azure IT Hub. What are these? So this is the definition and explanation of the data lake and IoT hub. If you want, you can pause the video and read the explanation. Question number 79 is that your company plans to deploy an artificial intelligence solution in Azure. What should the company use to build, test, and deploy predictive analytics solution? And the options are option A, Azure Logic Apps, option B, Azure Machine Learning Designer, option C, Azure Batch, and option D, Azure Cosmos DB. And the correct option is the Azure Machine Learning Designer. So the Azure Machine Learning Designer lets you visually connect datasets and modules on an interactive canvas to create machine learning models. Question number 80 is that what can you use to automatically send an alert if an administrator stops an Azure virtual machine? And the options are option A, Azure Advisor, option B, Azure Service Health, option C, Azure Monitor, and option D, Azure Network Watcher. And the correct option is the Azure Monitor. So with the Azure Monitor, you can set up alerts based on metrics and logs data, and you can receive notification through email, SMS, webhooks, and other channels. In case of an Azure virtual machine, you can use Azure Monitor to set up an alert that triggers if the virtual machine goes down or become unavailable. This way, you can receive an alert as soon as the virtual machine stops, allowing you to take prompt action and resolve the issue. Question number 81 is that you have an Azure environment. You need to create a new Azure virtual machine from a tablet that runs the Android operating system. What are three possible solutions? Each correct answer represents a complete solution. And the options are option A, use Bash in Azure Cloud Shell. Option B, use PowerShell in Azure Cloud Shell. Option C, use the Power Apps portal. Option D, use the Security and Compliance Admin Center. And option C, use the Azure portal. So the correct options are A, use Bash in Azure Cloud Shell. B, use PowerShell in Azure Cloud Shell. And E, use the Azure portal. So the Android tablet will have a web browser Chrome that's enough to connect to the Azure portal. The Azure portal offers three ways to create a VM. And what are these? Using the graphical portal, using Azure Cloud Shell using Bash, and using the Azure Cloud Shell using PowerShell. Question number 82 is that a team of developers at your company plans to deploy and then remove 50 virtual machines each week. All the virtual machines are configured by using Azure Resource Manager templates. You need to recommend which Azure service will minimize the administrative effort required to deploy and remove the virtual machines. What should you recommend? The options are option A, Azure Reserved Virtual Machine Instances. Option B, Azure DevTest Labs. Option C, Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets. And option D, Azure Virtual Desktop. And the correct option is the Azure DevTest Labs. So this is the explanation of the Azure DevTest Labs. You can read it if you want to. Question number 83 is that an Azure administrator plans to run a PowerShell scripts that creates Azure resources. You need to recommend which computer configuration to use to run these scripts. Solution: run the script from a computer that runs Windows 10 and has the Azure PowerShell module installed. Does this meet the goal? The options are A, yes, and B, no. The correct option is yes. So the PowerShell script is a file that contains PowerShell commandlets and code. A PowerShell script needs to be run in PowerShell. In this question, the computer has the Azure PowerShell module installed. Therefore, this solution does meet the goal. Question number 84 is that which service provides serverless computing in Azure? The options are A, Azure Virtual Machines, B, Azure Functions, C, Azure Storage Account, and D, Azure Dedicated Hosts. And the correct option is the Azure Functions. So the Azure Functions provide a platform for serverless code. Azure Functions is a serverless compute service that lets you run event-triggered code without having to explicitly provision or manage infrastructure. Question number 85 is that your company has several business units. Each business unit requires 20 different Azure resources for daily operation. All the business units require the same type of Azure resources. You need to recommend a solution to automate the creation of the Azure resources. What should you include in the recommendations? The options are option A, Azure Resource Manager templates. Option B, virtual machine scale sets. Option C, the Azure API Management Service. And option D, management groups. And the correct option is the Azure Resource Manager templates. Question number 86 is that what can you use to identify underutilized, keyword is underutilized or unused Azure virtual machines? The options are A, Azure Advisor, B, Azure Cost Management plus Billing, C, Azure Reservations, and D, Azure Policy. And the correct option is the Azure Advisor. Azure Advisor helps you optimize and reduce your overall Azure spending by identifying idle and underutilized resources. You can get cost recommendation from the cost tab on the Azure Advisor dashboard. Question number 87 is that a support engineer plans to perform several Azure management tasks by using the Azure CLI. You install the CLI on a computer. You need to tell the support engineer which tools to use to run the CLI. Which two tools should you instruct the support engineer to use? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. The options are A. Command prompt, B. Azure Resource Explorer, C. Windows PowerShell, D. Windows Defender Firewall, and E. Network and Sharing Center. And the correct options are the A. Command prompt and Windows PowerShell. So for Windows, the Azure CLI is installed via an MSI or Microsoft installer, which gives you access to the CLI through the Windows command prompt or CMD or PowerShell. Question number 88 is that you have an Azure environment. You need to create a new virtual machine from a tablet that runs the Android operating system. Solution: you use the Power Apps portal. Does this meet the goal? And the options are yes or no. The correct option is no. It is because the Power App lets you quickly build business application with little or no code. It is not used to create Azure virtual machines. Therefore, this solution does not meet the goal. Question number 89 is that you have an Azure environment. You need to create a new Azure virtual machine from a tablet that runs the Android operating system. Solution: you use the Azure portal. Does this meet the goal? The options are again yes and no, and the correct option is yes. So the Azure portal indeed let us create a new Azure virtual machine. The Azure portal is basically a web-based unified console that provides an alternative to the command line tools. With the Azure portal, you can manage your Azure subscription using a graphical user interface. You can build, manage, and monitor everything from simple web apps to complex cloud deployments. Create custom dashboards for an organized view of resources. Configure accessibility options for an optimal experience. And the last question of today's session is that which Azure service provides a set of version control tools to manage code? The options are A. Azure Repos, B. Azure DevTest Labs, C. Azure Storage, and D. Azure Cosmos DB. And the correct option is the Azure Repos or repositories. So the Azure Repos is a set of version control tools that you can use to manage your code. So that's all for today. Please like the video and stay tuned for the next session and the next video. Thank you and bye. Hi everyone and welcome to another session on Microsoft Azure Fundamental. So let's get straight to the questions. So the question number 91 is that which service provides network traffic filtering across multiple Azure subscription and virtual networks? And the options are option A, Azure Firewall, option B, an application security group, option C, Azure DDoS, distributed denial of service protection, and option D, a network security group, that is NSG. And the correct option is the Azure Firewall. So this is a diagrammatic view of the Azure Firewall. So it basically provides protection or traffic control between your virtual private network and the WAN. Here we can see that it provides us protection using layer 3 to layer 7 policies. It also provides protection against the internet traffic. So here we can say that by default, all the traffic is blocked. You have to specifically allow the traffic that you want inside your network. It also gives you protection inside your Azure from your on-premises. So the traffic from your on-premise to Azure is also controlled and allowed as per your policy. And it also gives you protection from within your Azure VNets or virtual network. So you can, for example, control traffic between your application servers and your, let's suppose here we have database servers. So it is a complete comprehensive security solution inside Azure, the Azure firewall. And there is another security paradigm inside Azure that is known as the NSG, Network Security Group. So I thought it will be good to give a comparison of both these two because there will be many questions on both these two services. So here is the basic comparison. What is the description? So the firewall is basically the managed, highly available, robust, and intelligent firewall with advanced packet inspection capability. It means that the Azure firewall is most advanced and most robust, while the NSG is a basic classic firewall filter based on a five tuple hash. What does five tuple mean? That it gives you the protection based on five tuple, and these include the source IP, destination IP, source port, destination port, and the protocol. So these are the five tuples and the layer of protection. So the firewall gives you up to the highest layer protection, that is layer 7. This is application layer, while the NSG, it basically gives you layer 3 and layer 4 protection. Layer 3 is the IP address and layer 4 is basically the ports, such as the SSH port is 22, HTTP port is 80, and that's it. The FQDN, fully qualified domain name tag support, so the Azure firewall supports it, while the NSG does not support this. And then the threat detection and blocking. So the Azure firewall supports real-time threat detection, while the NSG filters traffic based on allow and block rules that you have made. It does not do something by itself, but you have to define the rule, custom rule, and based on these rules, it will allow or deny certain type of traffics. Availability zone, the firewall supports availability zone, while the NSG does not support or require the availability zone. And the cost, so the firewall does cost at $1 per hour, excluding data processing charges, while the NSG is basically free, but standard data ingress egress cost apply. Complexity is that it requires intermediate to advanced knowledge to configure and implement the Azure firewall, while the NSG requires basic network knowledge to configure and implement. So in a nutshell, the Azure firewall is basically advanced and fully robust solution and gives you most feature, but is also incur cost, while the NSG provides basic protection based on source IP, destination IP, source port, and destination port, and up to from layer 3 to layer 4, while the firewall gives you support all the way up to layer 7, that is the application layer. Question number 92 is that your Azure environment contains multiple Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that a virtual machine named V1 is accessible from the internet or HTTP. Solution: you modify an Azure Traffic Manager profile. Does this meet the goal? The options are A, yes, and B, no. And the correct option is no. So the Traffic Manager profile does not give us the accessibility of your VM from over the internet using any type of protocol. It is because the Azure Traffic Manager is a DNS-based load balancing solution. It is not used to ensure that a virtual machine named V1 is accessible from the internet or HTTP. To ensure that a virtual machine named VM1 is accessible from the internet or HTTP, you need to modify a network security group or Azure firewall. So again, you can use either NSG or the firewall to do this purpose to access your virtual machine inside Azure from internet or HTTP. So in this section, we need to add a rule to the NSG or network security group or Azure firewall to allow the connection to the virtual machine on port 80, that is HTTP. Question number 93 is that your company plans to deploy several web servers and several database servers to Azure. You need to recommend an Azure solution to limit the types of connections from the web servers to the database servers. What should you include in the recommendations? The options are option A, network security groups, option B, Azure service bus, option C, a local network gateway, and option D, a route filter. And the correct option is again the network security group. So again, the network security group works just like a firewall as we studied. You can attach a network security group to a virtual network or individual subnets within virtual network. You can also attach a network security group to a network interface assigned to a virtual machine. You can use multiple network security groups within a virtual network to restrict traffic between resources such as virtual machines and subnets. And this is just an overview of this NSG. So as we studied that it gives you the protection based on the destination port, protocol, source IP, destination IP, and the action whether you want to allow or deny the traffic. This is the five tuple that we were talking about. Question number 94 is that which statement accurately describes the modern life cycle policy for Azure services? The options are A. Microsoft provides mainstream support for a service for 5 years. Option B. Microsoft provides a minimum of 12 months notice before ending support for a service. C. After a service is made generally available, Microsoft provides support for the service for a minimum of 4 years. And D. When a service is retired, you can purchase extended support for the service for up to 5 years. So the correct option is that the Microsoft provides a minimum of 12 months notice before ending support for a service. Question number 95 is that you have an Azure environment that contains 10 virtual networks and 100 virtual machines. You need to limit the amount of inbound traffic to all the Azure virtual networks. What should you create? And the options are A, one application security group, that is ASG, B, 10 virtual network gateways, C, 10 Azure ExpressRoute circuits, and D, one Azure firewall. And the correct option is the Azure firewall. Question number 96 is that you need to collect and automatically analyze security events from Azure Active Directory. What should you use? The options are A, Azure Sentinel, B, Azure Synapse Analytics, C, Azure AD Connect, and D, Azure Key Vault. And the correct option is the Azure Sentinel. What is the Azure Sentinel? Azure Sentinel is a cloud-native security information and event management, that is SIEM solution, that uses built-in AI and machine learning to detect, investigate, and respond to threats across your organization's entire hybrid state. Azure Sentinel provides a central location to collect security events from multiple sources, including Azure AD, and automatically analyzes them to identify potential threat. This is just a diagram of how this Azure or Microsoft Sentinel works. So this SIEM solution basically collects logs, that is security data across your enterprise. It then detects threats with vast threat intelligence. It then investigates for the critical incident guided by the AI, and then it responds rapidly and automate protection. So this is also known as the SOAR. The SOAR is basically security orchestration and automation, and automatic response. So the SIEM is basically, it is just a collection. It just collect and analyzes data, while the SOAR additionally respond to the threat in real time. Question number 97 is that you plan to deploy Azure virtual machines. You need to control the ports that devices on the internet can use to access the virtual machines. What should you use? And again, the options are A, the NSG Network Security Group, B, an Azure Active Directory role, C, Azure Active Directory Group, and D, an Azure Key Vault. And the correct option is again a network security group. So as the diagram say, the question is asking about the control of ports. So here we can see that we can control the ports, the destination port and the source ports. So the correct option is the NSG. These are the just rules that we have defined inside the NSG or network security group. Question number 98 is that your Azure environment contains multiple Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that a virtual machine named V1 is accessible from the internet or HTTP. Solution: you modify a DDoS protection plan, that is distributed denial of service protection plan. Does this meet the goal? The options are A, yes, B, no. The correct option is no. The DDoS protection does not give us the accessibility of our VM from the internet or HTTP. It is because DDoS is a form of attack on a network resource. DDoS protection plan is used to protect against distributed of denial service attacks or distributed denial of service attacks. It does not provide connectivity. It does not provide connectivity to a virtual machine. Let's get to the next question, and that is your Azure environment contains multiple Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that a virtual machine named VM1 is accessible from the internet or HTTP. Solution: you modify an Azure firewall. Does this meet the goal? The options are yes or no, and the correct option is yes. Because the Azure Firewall is a managed cloud-based network security service that protects your Azure virtual network resources. It is a fully stateful firewall as a service with built-in high availability and unrestricted cloud scalability. In this question, we need to add a rule to Azure Firewall to allow the connection to the virtual machine on port 80, that is HTTP. Question number 100 is that your Azure environment contains multiple Azure virtual machines. You need to ensure that a virtual machine named VM1 is accessible from the internet or HTTP. Solution: you modify an Azure Traffic Manager profile. Does this meet the goal? The options are A, yes, and B, no. The correct option is again no. Is because the Azure Traffic Manager is a DNS-based load balancing solution. It is not used to ensure that a virtual machine named VV1 is accessible from the internet or HTTP. Question number 101 is that which Azure service should you use to store certificates? The options are A, Azure Security Center, B, an Azure Storage Account, C, Azure Key Vault, and D, Azure Information Protection. And the correct option is the Azure Key Vault. Azure Key Vault is a secure store for storage various types of sensitive information, including passwords and certificates. Azure Key Vault can be used to securely store and tightly control access to tokens, passwords, certificate, API keys, and other secrets. Question number 102 is that which Azure service can you use as a security information and event management that is SIEM solution? And the options are A, Azure Analysis Service, B, Azure Sentinel, C, Azure Information Protection, and D, Azure Cognitive Services. And the correct option is the Azure Sentinel. What is Azure Sentinel? So this is the SIEM solution that we already discussed. So it is used to collect data across your whole enterprise and whole platform, then used to detect threats with threat intelligence. And again, it is also used to investigate the critical incidents guided by the AI, and then it automatically responds to the threats that are detected rapidly and automate protection. So these are the four cardinals of the SIEM, or we can also say the SOAR solution, and that is Microsoft Sentinel. Question number 103 is that what can Azure Information Protection encrypt? And the options are A, network traffic, B, documents and email messages, C, an Azure storage account, and D, an Azure SQL database. And the correct option is that the information protection can encrypt the document and email messages. So the Azure Information Protection is a cloud-based solution that helps an organization to classify and optionally protect its documents and emails by applying labels. Question number 104 is that what should you use to evaluate whether your company's Azure environment meets regulatory requirement? The options are A, the Knowledge Center website, B, the Advisor Blade from the Azure portal, C, Compliance Manager from the Service Trust portal, and D, the Solutions Blade from the Azure portal. And the correct option is the Compliance Manager from the Service Trust portal. So the Compliance Manager in the Service Trust portal is a workflow-based risk assessment tool that helps you track, assign, and verify your organization's regulatory compliance activities related to the Microsoft Cloud services such as Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and Azure. Question number 105 is that from Azure Cloud Shell, you can track your company's regulatory standards and regulations such as ISO 27001. Instructions: review the underlined text. If it makes the statement correct, select no. Change is needed, and if the statement is incorrect, select the answer choice that makes the statement correct. So options are A, no change is needed, B, the Microsoft Cloud Partner Portal, C, Compliance Manager, and D, the Trust Center. And the correct option is the Compliance Manager is basically used to track your company regulatory standards and regulations such as the ISO 27001, not the Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell cannot be used for this purpose rather than Compliance Manager is the correct answer. So the Compliance Manager in the Service Trust portal is a workflow-based risk assessment tool that helps you track, assign, and verify your organization regulatory compliance activities related to Microsoft Cloud services such as Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and Azure. Question number 106 is that your company plans to migrate all on-premises data to Azure. You need to identify whether Azure complies with company's original requirements. What should you use? And the options are A, the Knowledge Center, B, Azure Marketplace, C, My Apps Portal, and D, the Trust Center. And the correct option is the Trust Center. So the Azure has more than 90 compliance certifications, including over 50 specific to global regions and countries, such as the US, the European Union, and Germany, Japan, UK, India, and China. You can view a list of compliance certifications in the Trust Center to determine whether Azure meets your regional requirements. So that's all. Thank you for watching. So please like and subscribe and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you and see you.